I found the photograph on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 weeks after we buried my father. The light coming through the attic window was golden and dusty, the kind that makes everything look older than it is, like you're moving through a memory that doesn't quite belong to you. My mother had asked me to sort through the boxes of his things, the ones she couldn't bring herself to touch. She'd been sleeping in the guest room since he died, couldn't bear to see his side of the bed empty. So I climbed the narrow stairs to the attic alone, breathing in the smell of cardboard and mothballs and something else, something that reminded me of him, though I couldn't say what it was. The boxes were stacked against the far wall, unlabeled, taped shut with that brown packing tape that yellows at the edges. I'd brought scissors and garbage bags, thinking I'd be throwing most of it away. Old tax documents, maybe, receipts from decades ago, the accumulated paper debris of a life lived carefully, quietly, the way my father lived everything. He'd been a high school principal for 30 years, respected in our small town, the kind of man people stopped to talk to at the grocery store. When he died of a heart attack in his office, the funeral was standing room only. Students from 20 years ago flew in to pay their respects. I remember a young woman, probably in her 30s now, who stood at the back of the church crying, telling anyone who would listen that my father had been the only adult who believed in her when she was failing out of school, that he'd changed her life. My mother held my hand through the whole service, her fingers cold and trembling, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a person could be so loved and then just gone, like a light switching off. I opened the first box expecting nothing. Found his old university textbooks, pages yellowed and margins filled with his neat handwriting. There was a physics textbook from 1981, a collection of Shakespeare plays, a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird with passages underlined and notes in the margins about teaching it to reluctant readers. I ran my fingers over his handwriting, the precise loops and careful letters, and felt my throat tighten. The second box held framed certificates. Teacher of the Year 1995, Community Service Award 2003, 30 years of service plaques from the school district. There was a coffee mug that said World's Best Dad that I'd given him when I was 9, bought with my allowance money at the mall. I remembered how proud I'd been to give it to him, how he'd used it every morning for years until the handle broke. My throat tightened. I set the mug aside carefully, like it might break further, even though it was already chipped along the rim. The third box held financial records, neatly organized in manila folders with dates written in his precise handwriting. Tax returns going back decades, receipts filed by year, bank statements arranged chronologically. My father had been meticulous about everything. It was one of the things I'd inherited from him, this need for order, for everything in its place. The fourth box held photo albums from before I was born. Pictures of him and my mother when they were young. Their faces smooth and hopeful in that way people look before life teaches them about loss. There was one of their wedding day. My mother in a simple white dress, my father in a brown suit that looked dated even then. They stood in front of a courthouse, just the two of them and a witness, smiling like they held a secret the rest of the world didn't know. My mother had told me once that they'd gotten married on a Thursday afternoon, that my father had taken the day off from his teaching job, that they'd gone to dinner at a Chinese restaurant afterward and split an order of egg rolls because they were broke. It had sounded romantic when I was younger. Now it just seemed sad, this beginning that had led to everything that came after. The fifth box felt lighter. When I cut through the tape and pulled back the flaps, I saw it wasn't full, just a few items scattered at the bottom. A watch I didn't recognize, Silver with a black leather band, the kind of watch you give someone for an anniversary or birthday. Some loose papers that looked like receipts, and underneath those, a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it, leaving red dust on my fingers. I picked up the stack and started flipping through them slowly. Pictures of my father at various ages, some I'd seen before, duplicates from our family albums downstairs. Him holding me as a baby, my head barely bigger than his hand. Him standing next to my mother at their 20th anniversary party, both of them wearing forced smiles because they just had an argument about something I couldn't remember. Him in his office, smiling behind his desk, surrounded by books and the academic paraphernalia of a life spent in schools. And then a photograph I'd never seen. My father stood next to a woman I didn't know. She was younger than my mother, maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a smile that looked genuine, unguarded, the kind of smile people have when they're truly happy. She wore jeans and a blue sweater, casual clothes that somehow looked right on her. My father's arm was around her shoulders, his hand resting there with the easy comfort of familiarity. In front of them stood a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, holding both their hands. She wore a pink dress with white flowers on it and had her hair in braids tied with ribbons. She was looking up at my father with complete adoration, the way children look at their parents when they still believe they can do no wrong. The three of them stood in front of a small house with blue shutters, the kind of modest single-family home you see in working-class neighborhoods. There was a garden in front with flowers blooming and a swing set visible in the background. They looked like a family. They looked happy. They looked real. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to make sense of it. My brain kept trying to find innocent explanations. Maybe this was a colleague's family, and he was just in the photo by chance, maybe at some school event or community gathering. Maybe the woman was a teacher he'd worked with, and this was her daughter, and they just happened to take a picture together. But even as I thought these things, I knew they weren't true. The way he stood with them, the way his hand rested on the woman's shoulder, the way the woman leaned into him slightly, the way the little girl looked up at him with complete trust and affection. These weren't the poses of strangers or colleagues. These were the poses of people who belonged to each other, who'd stood together like this many times before, who were comfortable in each other's space. I turned the photo over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, that same neat, careful handwriting I'd seen in his textbooks and on his lesson plans and in birthday cards he'd given me over the years, it said, Emma's 7th birthday, June 2023. June 2023. I did the math in my head. Less than 18 months ago. I would have been 27. My father would have been 61. My parents would have been married for 33 years. I remembered June 2023. I'd been working at the marketing firm downtown, just gotten a promotion. My father had taken me out to dinner to celebrate, told me how proud he was of me. That dinner had been on a Friday night. Had he seen this other family earlier that same week? Had he celebrated this little girl's birthday on a Tuesday or Wednesday, then taken his other daughter out to celebrate her achievements on Friday, switching between lives like someone changing clothes? The attic suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker and harder to breathe. I sat down on the dusty floor, still holding the photograph, and tried to breathe normally. My hands were shaking. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, could hear the blood rushing in my ears. There had to be an explanation. There had to be something I was missing. But the more I looked at the photo, the more undeniable it became. This wasn't an old picture from before my parents met. This wasn't some distant relative I'd never heard of. This was recent. This was deliberate. This was a secret. I went through the rest of the photographs in the stack, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There were more, many more. My father and the woman at a restaurant, sitting across from each other at a small table with a candle between them, holding hands over the table like lovers do. My father pushing the little girl on a swing, her head thrown back in laughter, his face bright with joy. My father and the woman and the child sitting on a couch together, the woman leaning against his shoulder, the child curled up on his lap, all of them watching something off camera, probably a television. In that photo, they were wearing matching pajamas, the kind of coordinated family outfits people buy for Christmas cards. My father had on plaid flannel pants and a gray t-shirt. The woman wore similar pants with a matching shirt. The little girl had on footy pajamas with penguins on them. There was a Christmas tree in the background, decorated with lights and ornaments and a star on top. I remembered that Christmas 2022. My father had told us he had to work over the holiday break, that there were administrative tasks that needed to be completed before the new semester. My mother and I had celebrated without him, just the two of us, eating takeout Chinese food and watching old movies. He'd called us in the evening, wished us Merry Christmas, said he missed us and would be home soon. And apparently, after that call, he'd gone to this other house with this other family and celebrated Christmas with them too. Had he given gifts to both families? Had he sung carols twice? Had he felt any guilt at all? Or had he become so practiced at compartmentalizing his life that it felt normal to him? In every photo, they looked comfortable, familiar, real. There were pictures of birthday parties and beach trips and ordinary moments, making breakfast together, raking leaves in a yard, building a snowman. There were photos that seemed to span years. In some, the little girl looked much younger, maybe 3 or 4. In others, she looked almost exactly as she did in the most recent photo, just slightly older, slightly taller. This wasn't a recent affair. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a sustained, deliberate double life that had been going on for years. At the bottom of the stack, tucked underneath all the other photographs, I found a birthday card. The front had a cartoon cake with candles and balloons, the kind of cheerful, generic card you buy at a drugstore. Inside, in looping, feminine handwriting that slanted to the right, it said, "To the man who makes every day brighter. Thank you for being the best partner anyone could ask for. Happy 60th. All my love, Rachel." Below that, in a child's uneven letters, large and carefully drawn with a purple crayon, "I love you, Daddy. Happy birthday, Daddy. You are the best daddy in the world." I stared at those words, "I love you, Daddy," until they stopped looking like words and started looking like symbols, like hieroglyphics from a language I'd never learned. My father had another daughter, another child who called him Daddy, who believed he was the best father in the world, who loved him the way I loved him. And she had no idea I existed. Or did she? Did she know about me? Did she wonder why her father had to be away so much? Or had he lied to her too, told her some story that made sense of his absences? I sat there on the attic floor until the light changed from gold to gray, until the shadows grew long and the temperature dropped and I started to shiver. I couldn't move. I couldn't process what I'd found. My father had another family, another woman, another daughter. The words kept repeating in my mind like a chant, like a prayer, like a curse. But they wouldn't connect to anything real. This was my father. The man who taught me to ride a bike on a Saturday afternoon when I was 6, running beside me with his hand on the seat, promising he wouldn't let go, then letting go anyway so I could feel what it was like to ride on my own, catching me when I wobbled. The man who sat through every school play I was ever in, even though I only had 2 lines in most of them, and usually forgot at least one. The man who cried at my college graduation, tears streaming down his face as I walked across the stage, who told me afterward that he'd never been more proud of anything in his life. The man who called my mother sweetheart every morning and kissed her forehead before he left for work, a ritual I'd witnessed thousands of times, so consistent I'd stopped noticing it. That man couldn't have done this. That man couldn't have lived 2 separate lives, loved 2 separate women, fathered 2 separate daughters, and kept them all in neat compartments like files in a cabinet. But he had. The evidence was right here in my hands, undeniable and devastating. I finally stood up when my legs started to cramp, when the attic had grown so dark I could barely see. I gathered all the photographs and put them back in their stack, then placed them carefully in the box with the watch and the receipts. I carried the box downstairs, moving carefully in the dim light, and took it to my childhood bedroom where I'd been staying since the funeral. I spread the photographs out on the bed and stared at them until they stopped looking like pictures and started looking like evidence. Evidence of betrayal. Evidence of deception. Evidence that my entire life, everything I thought I knew about my family, was based on lies. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, listening to the house settle and creak around me. I could hear my mother in her room, the guest room now, not the master bedroom she'd shared with my father for over 3 decades, shifting in bed, probably not sleeping either. She was grieving the loss of her husband. But what was I grieving? The loss of my father? Or the loss of who I thought he was? Can you mourn someone who never really existed? Can you grieve for an illusion? The next morning, I woke up with the photographs still spread across my bed and a decision already forming in my mind. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen them. I couldn't put them back in the box and return the box to the attic and go on with my life as if nothing had changed. The truth was out there now, at least to me, and I needed to know more. I needed to understand how this had happened, how long it had been going on, whether my mother knew, whether anyone knew. I needed to understand who my father really was. I started methodically. I went back to the attic and searched through the rest of the boxes more carefully this time, looking for anything else that might tell me more. In a folder of old utility bills, tucked between statements from our house, I found statements for a storage unit in the next town over, a place called Safekeep Storage. The bills went back 6 years, paid every month like clockwork from an account I didn't recognize. Why would my father need a storage unit? Our house had plenty of space. The attic, the basement, the garage. We weren't the kind of family that needed external storage. Unless it was for things he didn't want us to find. I found more too. Bank statements for an account that wasn't in my mother's name, wasn't in my name, wasn't any account I'd ever heard of. The statements showed regular deposits from my father's paycheck. Not large amounts, but consistent, several $100s every 2 weeks. And withdrawals, also regular, for rent payments, for groceries, for utilities, for all the ordinary expenses of running a household. It was like looking at a parallel universe, a shadow life running alongside ours, funded by money my father had somehow hidden from my mother for years. There were receipts, too, once I started looking for them, tucked into books on his shelf, folded into old newspapers, stuffed in desk drawers. Receipts for restaurants in towns I'd never been to, for children's clothing stores, for toy shops, for all the mundane purchases you make when you're raising a child. Receipts dated over years, showing a pattern of spending that had nothing to do with our family. How had my mother not noticed? How had she not seen money disappearing, not questioned where he was going, not wondered about his absences? Or had she noticed and chosen not to ask? Had she suspected something and decided that not knowing was better than confronting the truth? I drove to the storage unit that afternoon, telling my mother I needed to run some errands. I couldn't tell her what I'd found, not yet. I needed more information first. I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done before I destroyed her world. She was sitting in the living room when I left, surrounded by sympathy cards from people who'd sent condolences, reading them one by one with tears streaming down her face. She looked so small sitting there, so broken, and I felt a surge of rage toward my father that was so intense it almost knocked me over. How could he do this to her? How could he betray someone who'd loved him so completely, so faithfully, for so long? The storage facility was one of those sprawling complexes of identical orange doors, rows and rows of them stretching back from the road like a maze. I went to the office, a small building with windows covered in security bars and a parking lot with cracks in the asphalt. Inside, a woman sat behind a desk, filing her nails and watching something on her phone. She looked up when I entered, taking in my appearance with a quick, practiced glance. I probably looked like hell. I hadn't slept, had barely eaten, was wearing the same clothes I'd worn the day before. "Can I help you?" she asked, setting down her nail file. "I need to access my father's storage unit," I said. "He passed away recently." "I have his death certificate." I slid the document across the desk. She looked at it, then at me, then back at the document. "I'll need to see your ID, too. Verify you're next of kin." I showed her my driver's license, waited while she compared the names. Whitmore, the name I shared with my father, the name that marked me as his daughter, the name that now felt like a lie. She typed something into her computer, clicked her mouse a few times, then nodded. "Unit 217, down the main aisle, take a left at the end, it's in the back row." She handed me a key. "Let me know when you're done. If you need a truck to haul anything away, we rent them by the hour." "Thank you," I said, taking the key. My hand was shaking. She pretended not to notice. I found the unit easily enough. The key turned smoothly in the lock, like it had been used recently, regularly. I took a deep breath, not sure what I'd find, then rolled up the metal door. The screech of metal on metal echoed through the complex, making me wince. The space was small, maybe 5 feet by 10 feet, and it was almost empty. Just a few boxes stacked neatly in the corner, the same kind of brown cardboard boxes that had been in the attic. No furniture, no old appliances, nothing you'd normally store in a unit like this. Just these boxes, waiting to be discovered or waiting to be hidden forever. I pulled them out into the light and opened them one by one. The first box held clothes. Women's clothes, nice ones, dresses and blouses still on hangers, carefully packed to avoid wrinkles. I pulled out a blue sundress, held it up to the light. It was pretty, simple, the kind of dress someone would wear to a summer barbecue or a casual dinner. It smelled faintly of perfume, a scent I didn't recognize. I checked the size, medium. My mother wore large. This belonged to someone else, to Rachel. The second box had children's things, books, The Very Hungry Caterpillar, Where the Wild Things Are, Charlotte's Web, all classics, all well-worn like they'd been read many times. Stuffed animals, a teddy bear with one eye missing, a rabbit with floppy ears, a dog with a red collar. A plastic tea set with tiny cups and saucers decorated with flowers. Art supplies, crayons and markers and coloring books. A ballet costume, pink tulle and satin ribbons. These were treasured things, beloved things, the artifacts of a childhood. Why were they here? Why not in that house with the blue shutters, in Emma's room where they belonged? The third box was full of documents, and this is where I found what I'd been looking for, the pieces that would help me understand. Lease agreements for a house on Maple Street in Riverside, the town 20 minutes east of ours, far enough to be separate, but close enough to visit regularly. The lease was in my father's name, starting 7 years ago. 7 years. Emma would have been about 2 then. Had they lived somewhere else before that? How long had this been going on? Beneath the lease agreements, I found school enrollment forms for Emma Rachel Whitmore, listing my father as the guardian, emergency contact forms with his name and phone number, medical records showing routine checkups, vaccinations, dental visits, all the documentation of a child being raised carefully, properly, by parents who took their responsibilities seriously. There was a birth certificate that made my breath catch in my throat. Emma Rachel Whitmore, born March 15, 2016, at Riverside General Hospital. Mother, Rachel Ann Whitmore. Father, Thomas James Whitmore. My father. His name was right there on the birth certificate, official and legal and undeniable. He hadn't just had an affair. He'd had a child. He'd acknowledged paternity. He'd given this little girl his last name, the same name I carried, the same name my mother carried. I sat on the floor of that storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of my father's secret life, and tried to understand how a person does this. How do you live 2 completely separate lives? How do you maintain 2 households, 2 relationships, 2 children? How do you remember which lie you told to which person? How do you keep track of which version of yourself you're supposed to be at any given moment? I kept reading through the documents. Bank statements for the account I'd seen referenced in the attic, showing regular deposits from my father's salary and regular withdrawals for ordinary household expenses. The math was staggering. He'd been funneling thousands of dollars to this other life every month for years. How had my mother not noticed? But then I thought about their finances, how my father had always handled the money, how he told my mother that he took care of everything, that she didn't need to worry about bills and accounts and investments. She'd trusted him. She'd believed him when he said everything was fine, that they were secure, that he had it all under control. And she'd never questioned it, because why would she? He was her husband. He was supposed to tell her the truth. There were other things in the box too. Birthday cards and Valentine's cards and Father's Day cards, all addressed to Tom or to Daddy, all signed with love from Rachel or Emma or both. I opened them one by one, reading the messages inside. Thank you for being such a wonderful father. You make every day special. We're so lucky to have you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. The handwriting progressed over the years. Emma's getting neater, more confident as she grew from a toddler into a child. Rachel staying the same, that looping feminine script that slanted to the right. There were letters, too, from Rachel to my father, written during what must have been times he was away with us, his other family, his first family. Or maybe we were his second family. Maybe this arrangement had gone on so long that the distinction didn't even matter anymore. I unfolded the letters carefully, feeling like I was violating someone's privacy, but unable to stop myself. One letter, dated 3 years ago, said, "Tom, Emma asked again today why you can't stay every night. I told her you have to travel for work, that you're doing important things that help a lot of people. She accepts it, but she's getting older. She understands more. She sees her friends' fathers coming home every night, and she wants to know why you can't do the same. I don't know how much longer I can keep saying the same things. She's starting to ask harder questions. I need you here more. We need you here. Not just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I know what we agreed when this started, and I know your situation is complicated, but it's getting harder. I love you. Please think about what I said. We can't keep living like this forever. Something has to change." Tuesdays and Thursdays, those were my father's late nights. The nights he said he had administrative work to finish, meetings with parents, events at the school that required his attendance. My mother and I had eaten dinner without him on Tuesdays and Thursdays for years. It had become so routine, so normal, that neither of us questioned it. And all that time, he was here, in Riverside, with Rachel and Emma, being a husband and father to them, playing a role he'd carefully carved out and maintained with meticulous consistency. Another letter, more recent, from just 8 months ago. "Tom, I'm scared. Emma came home from school yesterday and told me about a father-daughter dance they're having next month. She wants you to take her." She was so excited, talking about what dress she'll wear, whether you'll like the music they play. How am I supposed to tell her you can't come? What excuse am I supposed to give this time? She deserves to have her father at these events. She deserves to not have to make up stories about why you're never around when other kids' fathers are. I love you, and I know you love us, but I'm starting to wonder if love is enough. If love means we have to keep hiding, keep pretending, keep lying, then maybe I don't want this kind of love anymore. We need to talk, really talk, about what this is and what it's going to be. Because I can't keep doing this. I thought I could, but I can't. Call me when you can. I love you. I'm sorry. I just don't know what else to do. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. My father had spent his time, his money, his attention, his love, if what he felt could even be called love, between two families. Two women who each thought they had part of him, but neither of whom had all of him. Two daughters who each called him daddy, who each believed he was theirs. And he'd maintained this arrangement for years, through all the logistics and lies and careful scheduling that would have been required. It must have been exhausting. It must have required constant vigilance, constant attention to detail, constant fear of being discovered. Why had he done it? Why hadn't he just chosen? Why hadn't he left my mother if he wanted to be with Rachel, or left Rachel if he wanted to stay with my mother? Why build this elaborate architecture of deception instead of just telling the truth? I gathered everything: the photographs, the documents, the letters, the cards, and put them back in the boxes. I loaded the boxes into my car, locked the storage unit, and returned the key to the office. The woman behind the desk looked up from her phone. "Find what you needed?" "Yes," I said. "I found everything." I drove home slowly, my mind spinning. When I got there, my mother was still in the living room, but now she was sorting through old photographs from our own family albums, laying them out on the coffee table. She looked up when I walked in. "Look what I found," she said, holding up a picture of my father and me at my high school graduation. "Remember this day? You were so nervous about your speech, and he told you that even if you forgot every word, he'd still be proud of you. And then you gave that beautiful speech about following your dreams, and he cried. I'd never seen him cry like that before." I looked at the photograph. My father's arm was around my shoulders. I was wearing my cap and gown, holding my diploma, smiling widely. He was smiling too, but now I looked at that smile differently. Now I wondered what he'd been thinking in that moment. Had he been genuinely proud? Or had he been thinking about his other daughter, wondering if someday he'd attend her graduation too, if he'd have to split himself between two ceremonies on the same day, or if he'd have to choose which daughter's milestone mattered more? "Mom," I said carefully, "I need to show you something." She looked up at me, and something in my tone must have worried her because her smile faded. "What's wrong? You look upset." "I found something in the attic. And then I found more at a storage unit Dad was renting. I think you need to see it." I went to my car and brought in the boxes, set them on the living room floor. My mother stood up, confusion and concern crossing her face. "What is all this?" "Mom, I need you to sit down," I said. She sat, slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. I took out the first photograph, the one of my father with Rachel and Emma on Emma's 7th birthday, and handed it to her. She took it, looked at it, and I watched her face as she tried to process what she was seeing. Confusion first. Then recognition. She knew this wasn't an old photo, could see from the quality and colors that it was recent. Then denial. "Who are these people?" she asked, but her voice was already shaking. "Turned it over," I said quietly. "Read the back." She turned it over, read my father's handwriting. June 2023. I watched as the truth crashed over her like a wave. Watched as her face crumpled, as her hand started to shake so badly she almost dropped the photograph. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be right. There must be an explanation." I handed her another photograph, and another, and the birth certificate, and the letters, and the lease agreements. One by one, I gave her the pieces of evidence I'd found, watched as she read through them with tears streaming down her face, watched as her world collapsed the way mine had collapsed the day before in the attic. "How long?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "How long was this going on?" "At least 9 years," I said. "Maybe longer. Emma is 9. He acknowledged paternity on her birth certificate. He's been supporting them financially all this time. The storage unit bills go back 6 years. The lease on their house is 7 years old. But there might have been something before that. I don't know yet." My mother stared at the documents spread across the coffee table. She picked up one of the letters from Rachel, read it slowly, her lips moving slightly as she processed the words. "She didn't know," my mother said finally. "This woman, Rachel, she didn't know about us, did she?" "I don't think so," I said. "Not for most of it anyway. In the letters, she talks about wanting him to be there more, about Emma asking why he can't stay every night. If she'd known he had another family, she wouldn't have asked those questions. She would have known why." "So he lied to her too," my mother said. She looked up at me, and her face was a mixture of grief and anger and something else, something I couldn't quite identify. "He lied to all of us." We sat there together for a long time, not speaking, just sitting in the wreckage of what we discovered. Outside, it started to rain, a soft, steady rain that tapped against the windows and made the house feel smaller, more enclosed. Finally, my mother stood up. "I need to call someone," she said. "I need to tell someone about this." "Who?" I asked. "I don't know. His brother? My sister? Someone who knew him, who thought they knew him. Someone who can help me make sense of this." She looked at me, and her eyes were lost. "How do I make sense of this, Sarah? How do I understand how someone could do this? 33 years. We were married for 33 years. And all that time, he was living another life. How is that possible? I don't know, Mom. Did you see how old the little girl is? 9. He's been doing this for at least 9 years. Maybe longer if he was with this Rachel woman before the baby was born. 9 years of lying, 9 years of pretending, 9 years of living 2 completely separate lives. She laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. I thought I knew him. I thought we had a good marriage. We never fought, not really. He was attentive, considerate. He called me sweetheart. He kissed me every morning before work, every single morning for 33 years. And it was all a lie. Maybe it wasn't all a lie, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Maybe he did love you. Maybe he loved both of you. Maybe that was the problem. He couldn't choose, so he tried to have everything. That's not love, my mother said fiercely. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't deceive. Love doesn't split itself in half and pretend each half is whole. That's not love. That's selfishness. That's cowardice. She was right. I knew she was right. But I still couldn't quite reconcile the man who'd done this with the father I'd known. The father who'd taught me to tie my shoes and helped me with my homework and showed up to every important event in my life. Had that man been real? Or had he been a performance? A role my father played when he was with us? Just as carefully scripted as whatever role he played when he was with Rachel and Emma? Over the next few days, we tried to go on with our lives, but everything felt different now. Every memory was tainted. Every photograph in our albums now seemed like a lie. My mother moved through the house like a ghost, touching things that had been my father's, looking at them like she'd never seen them before. She pulled out old cards he'd given her, letters he'd written when they were dating, read through them looking for clues she'd missed, signs that should have told her he was capable of this kind of deception. She found nothing. Or maybe she found everything. Declarations of love that now seemed hollow, promises that had been broken, words that meant nothing when spoken by someone who was living a lie. I became obsessed with finding out more. I couldn't help myself. I went through my father's phone records, the detailed statements I'd found in the attic that showed every call he'd made over the past 2 years. I saw how he'd called Rachel almost every day, usually in the morning before school started or in the evening after dinner at our house. Short calls, 5 or 10 minutes, the kind of check-ins that couples make. How was your day? I love you. Sleep well. Ordinary conversations that meant he was maintaining both relationships simultaneously, splitting his attention and his affection with practiced ease. I looked through his email too, accessing his account with the password I'd known for years, our dog's name plus my mother's birth year, a password he'd never bothered to change because he'd never thought anyone would look. There were hundreds of emails to Rachel, going back years. Love letters, basically. I miss you when we're apart. I can't wait to see you Tuesday. You make me happier than I've ever been. And mixed in with those were emails to my mother, equally affectionate if less frequent. Don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons on Saturday. I love you, sweetheart. Looking forward to our anniversary trip. He'd loved them both, in his way. Or maybe he'd loved neither of them, just loved the idea of being loved, of being needed, of being the center of 2 separate universes. I found his calendar too, a digital calendar synced to his phone that showed years of careful scheduling. Color-coded entries, blue for school events, green for our family activities, red for Rachel and Emma. Tuesdays and Thursdays were always blocked out in red. Some weekends, too, Saturday mornings when he said he was going to the gym. Sunday afternoons when he claimed he was meeting with parents or working in his office. The red blocks showed the truth. He was with them, having breakfast with Emma, taking Rachel to the movies, playing in the park, living a completely separate life while we thought he was working or exercising or handling the administrative duties of being a principal. There were more photos too, stored in cloud accounts I accessed with that same password. Thousands of them. Years of documentation of Emma's childhood. First steps, first day of school, birthday parties, Halloween costumes, Christmas mornings. In many of them, my father was present, smiling, engaged, playing the role of devoted father just as convincingly as he played it with me. I looked at photos of Emma learning to ride a bike, my father running beside her just as he'd run beside me. Emma at her dance recitals, my father in the audience just as he'd sat in audiences for my school plays. Emma opening presents on Christmas morning, my father sitting on the floor beside her in those matching pajamas, helping her tear through wrapping paper with the same enthusiasm he'd shown with me years ago. He'd given her everything he'd given me, the same attention, the same affection, the same presence. Except it wasn't the same because it was divided. We'd each gotten half a father, though neither of us had known it. 10 days after I found the first photograph, I made my decision. I had to meet them. I couldn't move forward without understanding the full story, without hearing it from Rachel herself, without seeing this little girl who was my half-sister, even though we'd never met. I needed to look Rachel in the eye and understand how she'd been deceived, what my father had told her, how she'd lived with this arrangement. So I got in my car one afternoon when my mother was resting. She'd been sleeping a lot lately, exhaustion and grief making her retreat into unconsciousness, and I drove to Riverside, to the house on Maple Street. The house looked exactly as it had in the photographs. Small but well-maintained, painted a cheerful yellow with those blue shutters, a small garden in front with flowers that were starting to fade with the season. There was a minivan in the driveway, practical and modest, a bicycle with training wheels leaned against the front porch. This was where my father had come on those Tuesday and Thursday nights. This was where he'd spent a portion of his life, in this house that looked nothing like ours, with this woman I'd never met and this child I'd never known existed. I sat in my car for a long time before I got the courage to walk up to the door. My heart was pounding so hard I felt dizzy. What was I going to say? How do you introduce yourself as the other daughter? How do you explain that you've just discovered your father's secret family and you need to understand how this happened? There was no script for this, no proper etiquette for confronting your father's lies after his death. Finally, I got out of the car and walked to the door. Knocked 3 times. Waited. I could hear movement inside, footsteps approaching. Then the door opened, and Rachel was standing there. She looked older than in the photographs, more tired, with circles under her eyes and lines around her mouth that suggested worry and stress. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore jeans and an oversized sweater that looked comfortable and worn. When she saw me, her expression shifted from polite curiosity to confusion. I saw her trying to place me, saw the moment when something clicked, when she recognized something familiar in my face even though we'd never met. "Can I help you?" she asked, but her voice was uncertain. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say during the drive over, had practiced the words in my head, but now that she was standing in front of me, all the careful phrases disappeared. So instead, I just said, very quietly, "My name is Sarah Whitmore. I'm Thomas Whitmore's daughter." The color drained from her face. She gripped the doorframe like she needed it for support, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Her eyes went wide, and I saw fear there, and shock, and something else, recognition of a truth she'd probably suspected but had never wanted to confirm. She looked over her shoulder into the house, checking for something, probably Emma, then stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind her. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice wasn't angry. It was scared, desperate. "Please, you need to leave." "I found photos," I said, "in his things, after he died. I found everything. The storage unit, the bank statements, the letters you wrote him. I know about Emma. I know about all of it." She closed her eyes, and I saw her swallow hard. When she opened them again, there were tears there, not falling yet, just gathering on her lower lids. "Did you tell your mother?" "Yes, she knows." Rachel's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with one hand, and the tears started to fall. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You have to believe me. I didn't know about you, about your mother. He told me he was widowed. He said his wife had died. I never would have, if I'd known." "I know," I said, though I wasn't sure I did know. "Can we talk? Please, I need to understand what happened. I need to hear it from you." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw her weighing her options, trying to decide if she could trust me, if this was a trap, if I was here to hurt her or blame her. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Emma's at school. She gets home at 3. We can talk until then, but you have to leave before she gets back. I can't. She can't know about this yet. She can't know about you. Not yet." I followed her into the house. It was small but clean and carefully decorated with the kind of thoughtfulness that shows someone's trying to make a home out of limited resources. The walls were painted in warm colors, yellows and creams. Photos covered every available surface, on the walls, on the refrigerator, on end tables and shelves. And in so many of them, there was my father, smiling, laughing, present, more copies of him than we had in our own house. It was like walking into an alternate reality, a parallel universe where my father was still alive and had always been here. We sat at the kitchen table, a small wooden table with 4 chairs. Rachel made coffee with shaking hands, the mug clattering against the counter as she set it down. She didn't speak until she'd sat across from me, her own mug wrapped in both hands like she needed the warmth even though the house wasn't cold. "How much do you know?" she asked finally. "I know you've been together for at least 9 years, since before Emma was born. I know he was supporting you financially. I know he came here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and sometimes on weekends. I know Emma thinks he's her father, which he is biologically, but I don't know how it started. I don't know what he told you. I don't know when you found out the truth." She stared down into her coffee, and when she spoke, her voice was so quiet, I had to lean forward to hear her. "I met him 9 years ago. 10, actually, if you count from when we first started talking. I was working as a receptionist at the hospital where he went for his annual checkups. We started chatting while he waited for his appointments. He was so kind, you know, so genuinely interested in what I had to say. He'd ask about my life, my family, my dreams. He listened like he really cared. And I was alone at the time, had just gotten out of a bad relationship, was living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment. He seemed like a good man, stable, mature, safe." She paused, took a sip of coffee. "We started seeing each other after a few months. He asked me out to dinner, and it was wonderful, romantic. He brought me flowers, opened doors for me, said all the right things. He told me he was widowed. Said his wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. He told me he had a daughter from that marriage, but that you were grown and living your own life in another city, and that you drifted apart after your mother died. He made it sound like he was this lonely man who'd been through terrible loss and was just trying to find happiness again. He said he'd been alone for so long, and meeting me felt like a second chance. I felt sick listening to this. Every word was a lie. A careful, deliberate lie designed to manipulate this woman into feeling sorry for him, into giving him what he wanted without questioning his story. And you believed him. Why wouldn't I? Rachel looked up at me and there was pain in her eyes, but also defiance. He was a school principal. He was respected in his community. He showed me pictures of his late wife, pictures I now realize must have been old photos of your mother from decades ago. He cried when he talked about losing her. Real tears, Sarah. I saw him cry. How do you fake that? How do you manufacture that kind of emotion? I don't know, I said quietly. We dated for about 6 months and then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. I was terrified. I barely knew him, really, even though it felt like I did. But he was wonderful about it. He said he wanted the baby, wanted to be a family. He said he'd take care of everything. And he did. He found this house, helped me move in, set up the nursery. He bought everything we needed. He was there when Emma was born, cut the umbilical cord, held her before I did. He was there for her first steps, her first words. He was a good father, Sarah. Whatever else he was good to her. But he wasn't there all the time, I said. No, he said he had to travel for work. School district meetings, conferences, training sessions. It made sense. Principals travel, don't they? And he was there as much as he could be. Tuesday and Thursday nights, every week, without fail. Sometimes weekends. Sometimes he'd take a few vacation days and stay for a week straight. Emma and I would get so excited when he said he could stay longer than usual. We thought we were lucky, that he was making time for us despite his busy schedule. We never questioned why he couldn't just live here, why he had to leave. We thought it was just how his life was structured. Rachel's voice cracked, and she had to stop for a moment to compose herself. Emma started asking questions about 2 years ago. She was 7, old enough to notice that other kids' fathers lived with them all the time. She'd come home from play dates and ask why her daddy couldn't be there every night like her friends' daddies. I didn't know what to tell her. I asked Tom about it, said we needed to figure out something more permanent. That's when things started to change. What do you mean? He started making excuses, said it was complicated, that he was working on it, that he just needed more time. He promised we'd be a real family someday, that he'd find a way to make it work. But months went by and nothing changed, and I started to get suspicious, started asking harder questions. Why couldn't I meet his family? Why couldn't I visit his house? Why didn't he ever talk about where he lived or what he did when he wasn't with us? And he'd get defensive, or change the subject, or find ways to make me feel guilty for asking. When did you find out the truth? Rachel closed her eyes. 6 months ago. I was doing laundry and found a receipt in his pocket. A grocery store receipt from a store in your town, our town, not Riverside, for groceries he'd supposedly bought here. But the receipt was dated on a Monday, and he hadn't been here on that Monday. So I started paying more attention, checking his pockets, looking through his phone when he was in the shower, and I found messages, text messages to someone named S that were clearly from your mother, even though he'd saved the contact under an initial. Messages about household things, dinner plans, asking him to pick up milk on his way home. And I realized he had a home, another home, with another woman, maybe with another child. Everything he told me was a lie. Did you confront him? Yes, I confronted him that same night, and he admitted it, said he was still married, that his wife didn't know about me or Emma. He said he'd been trying to find the right time to tell her to leave, but it was complicated. He said his wife was fragile, that she had health problems, that he was worried about what it would do to her. He begged me not to leave, said he loved me, loved Emma, that we were his real family, and he just needed a few more months to figure out how to do it right. And you stayed? What was I supposed to do? Rachel's voice rose, and I heard the anger in it, the frustration and desperation. I had a 7-year-old daughter who loved her father. I had no savings, barely any income. He paid for everything. This house, the utilities, groceries, Emma's school, her dance classes, everything. I couldn't afford to leave. I couldn't afford childcare if I worked full-time. My family lives across the country. I had no one here, no support system. I was trapped. So yes, I stayed. I told myself that maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he really would leave eventually. And I waited. I waited and waited, and I hated myself for waiting, but I didn't know what else to do. We sat in silence for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time neither of us wanted to pass. I looked at this woman sitting across from me, this stranger who'd been part of my father's life for almost a decade. And I realized we weren't that different. We'd both been lied to. We'd both been manipulated. We'd both loved a man who'd turned out to be someone completely different from who we thought he was. And then he died, I said finally. And then he died, Rachel repeated, her voice flat. I didn't even find out right away. He didn't come for his Tuesday visit, didn't call. At first, I thought maybe something had come up, some emergency at work. But then Thursday came and went, and still nothing. No calls, no texts. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. By Friday, I was panicking. I thought something terrible had happened. And then on Saturday, I Googled his name and found the obituary. Her voice broke completely then, and she started to cry in earnest. It said he was survived by his loving wife of 33 years and his daughter Sarah. 33 years! He'd been married the entire time. The entire time, Sarah. When he met me, when we started dating, when I got pregnant, when Emma was born. He was married to your mother the whole time. And there was no mention of Emma in the obituary, no mention of me. Like we didn't exist. Like 9 years of his life just didn't happen. Like Emma wasn't his daughter. Like we were nothing. I reached across the table and took her hand. She gripped it tightly, her tears falling onto the wooden surface. I told Emma that her father had to go away for work, that he'd be gone for a long time. I didn't know how to tell her the truth. I still don't know how to tell her. How do I explain to a 9-year-old that her father had another family, that he lied to us, that he's gone and she'll never get answers to all the questions she's going to have? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't have answers for that. Rachel pulled her hand away and wiped her eyes. Why are you here, Sarah? What do you want from me? It was a fair question. Why was I here? What did I hope to accomplish? I needed to understand, I said finally. I needed to know the full story. I needed to know if you knew about us, if you were complicit in this, or if you were a victim too. And I needed to see Emma, even if just from a distance. She's my half-sister. I've had a sister for 9 years, and I didn't even know it. Do you want to meet her? Rachel asked. I don't know, maybe someday. But not now, not while she's grieving, not while she still doesn't know the truth. When will she know the truth? When will it be the right time to destroy her understanding of who her father was? I don't know that either. Rachel stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. There's something else you should know, something I haven't told anyone. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at her back, trying to process what she just said. Pregnant? Almost 3 months. I found out 2 weeks before he died. I was planning to tell him on his next visit. I was so happy, Sarah. I thought this would be the thing that finally made him leave, made him commit to us full time. I thought he'd be excited. But then he died, and now I'm alone and pregnant, and I have no idea how I'm going to manage. I didn't know what to say. Another child, another of my father's children, a baby who would never know their father, who would grow up with only stories about a man who'd lived a lie. Does anyone know? Just you. I haven't told Emma yet. I haven't told my doctor. I've been trying to figure out what to do. Whether I can afford to have this baby. Whether I should have it at all. Your father was supporting us financially. Now that he's gone, I don't know how I'm going to pay for anything. I've applied for jobs, but childcare is expensive, and I'd barely break even with what I could earn. I'm going to lose this house. We're going to end up in some tiny apartment, or worse, and bringing another child into this mess? She shook her head. I don't know what to do. My father had a pension, I said, and life insurance. Emma is entitled to survivor's benefits. Even though he never legally acknowledged her, the birth certificate lists him as the father. You have documentation. You have rights. Rachel turned to look at me. Your mother would have to know. It would all have to come out. Everything. My mother already knows. I told her everything, and she deserves to know about this too. My father's estate owes Emma support. It owes this baby support. You shouldn't have to struggle alone because he was a coward who couldn't tell the truth. But what about you? Rachel asked. The life insurance, the pension, that money was meant for you and your mother. If Emma gets part of it, if this baby gets part of it, there'll be less for you. I don't care about the money, I said, and I realized it was true. I didn't care about my father's money. I didn't want anything from him anymore. Not his inheritance, not his legacy, nothing. Emma is his daughter. She deserves what's hers, and so does this baby. We talked for another hour, discussing practicalities. I gave Rachel the name of a lawyer, someone who could help her file for survivor's benefits and establish Emma's rights to part of my father's estate. I told her about the storage unit, about the boxes of clothes and toys that belonged to Emma. We talked about my mother, about how she was handling all of this, about whether we'd ever all sit down together and try to make sense of what had happened, and we talked about Emma. Rachel showed me more photos of her, told me stories about her personality, her interests, her dreams. She was good at math apparently, wanted to be a veterinarian. Loved animals, especially dogs. She was in 3rd grade, had a best friend named Maya, was taking ballet lessons twice a week. She was shy around strangers, but opened up once she knew someone. She looked like my father, Rachel said, had his smile and his eyes and his quiet way of observing before speaking. She's going to want to meet you someday, Rachel said. When she's older, when she understands everything, she's going to want to know her sister. I'll be here, I said. When she's ready, I'll be here. At 10 minutes to 3, Rachel walked me to the door. As I was leaving, she touched my arm. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for not hating me. I know this is all my fault too, in a way. I should have asked more questions. I should have pushed harder when things didn't make sense. I was too desperate to be loved to see the truth. It's not your fault, I said firmly. None of this is your fault. He lied to you, just like he lied to us. He manipulated you. You were trying to build a life with someone you loved. There's nothing wrong with that. I drove away before Emma got home from school, before I had to see my half-sister and try to reconcile her existence with everything I'd believed about my family. On the drive home, I thought about everything Rachel had told me, about my father's careful lies, his elaborate deceptions, the way he'd constructed two completely separate realities and maintained them both with meticulous attention. And I thought about the cruelty of it, the selfishness of choosing to have everything instead of making the hard choice to be honest. When I got home, my mother was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw the question in her eyes. "You went to see them?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes." And? Rachel didn't know about us, not for most of it anyway. She found out 6 months ago. He told her he was widowed, that you died years ago, that he was alone. She believed him because why wouldn't she? And now she's trapped in this situation he created, trying to figure out how to take care of Emma without his financial support. My mother nodded slowly. "Did you see the child, Emma?" "No, she was at school, but I saw pictures. She looks like him, Mom. She has his smile." "Does she know he's dead?" "Rachel told her he had to go away for work. She hasn't figured out how to tell her the truth yet." We sat in silence for a while. Then my mother said, "There's something I need to tell you. I've been thinking about this for days, and I've made a decision. I'm not going to contest Emma's right to survivor's benefits or her right to part of your father's estate. She's his child, even though he never had the courage to acknowledge her publicly. She deserves what's hers." "Mom." "No, let me finish. I know what this means. It means less money for us. It means people will know about his affair, about his secret family. It means his reputation will be destroyed. But I don't care anymore about protecting him. He didn't protect me. He didn't protect any of us. He built this mess, and now we're all living in it. The least I can do is make sure his daughter is taken care of." I felt tears stinging my eyes. "Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not doing this to be noble. I'm doing it because it's right. And because I'm angry. I'm so angry, Sarah. 33 years. He wasted 33 years of my life. I could have left him, found someone else, someone honest. I could have had a different life. But I stayed because I loved him, because I trusted him, because I believed in our marriage. And all that time, he was with her, with them, living another life, being another person. I'll never forgive him for that." Over the next few weeks, we began the process of unraveling my father's secret life and dealing with the legal and financial consequences. My mother hired a lawyer who contacted Rachel's lawyer, and they worked out an arrangement for Emma to receive part of my father's pension and life insurance. It wasn't a huge amount. My father's estate wasn't substantial, but it was enough to help Rachel and Emma stay afloat, to buy Rachel some time to get back on her feet. But I found myself unable to leave it at that, because there was something else bothering me, something beyond the personal betrayal and the family drama. My father had spent his entire career building a reputation in our community. He'd been respected, admired, seen as a pillar of integrity. People looked up to him. They trusted him with their children. And his legacy was being preserved. The school district had announced plans to establish a scholarship fund in his name, to put his picture on the wall of honor in the main building, to name the new library after him. And all of it was based on a lie. I thought about this constantly. About the injustice of it, the wrongness of honoring someone who'd lived such a fundamentally dishonest life. My father had preached about character and integrity to generations of students. He'd suspended kids for cheating, lectured them about the importance of honesty, told them that who you are when no one is watching is who you really are. And all the while, he'd been living the biggest lie of all. He'd been the worst kind of hypocrite, the kind who teaches one thing while doing another, who demands integrity from others while having none himself. And I realized that I had a choice to make. I could let his secret stay buried with him. I could protect his reputation, preserve his legacy, allow him to be remembered as the good man everyone thought he was. Or I could tell the truth. I could expose what he'd done, let people know who he really was, destroy the false image he'd spent a lifetime constructing. It would hurt people. It would hurt my mother, exposing her private pain to public scrutiny. It would hurt Rachel and Emma, dragging them into a spotlight they hadn't asked for. It would hurt me, making my family's dysfunction a matter of public record. And it would hurt everyone who'd admired my father, who'd looked up to him, who'd been taught by him, or worked with him, or considered him a friend. They'd all have to confront the fact that they'd been deceived, that the man they thought they knew had never really existed. But secrets had given my father power. Secrets had allowed him to maintain his double life, to hurt multiple people while protecting his image. And I was tired of carrying his secrets. I was tired of the weight of them, the way they made me complicit in his deceptions just by knowing about them and staying silent. So I made my decision. I would tell the truth, all of it, publicly. I would write down everything I discovered, the photographs, the storage unit, the financial records, Rachel and Emma's existence, the 9 years of lies. I would document it all carefully, factually, with evidence to support every claim. And I would make sure everyone knew, the school district, the community, anyone who was planning to honor his memory. They deserved to know who they were honoring. I started writing late one night, sitting at my desk in my childhood bedroom with all the documents spread around me. I wrote about finding the photograph in the attic, about the shock of discovery, about the investigation that followed. I wrote about meeting Rachel, about learning her story, about Emma and the baby Rachel was carrying. I wrote about my mother's betrayal, about the 33 years of marriage that had been built on lies. And I wrote about my father, about the man I thought he was versus the man he actually was, about the gap between his public persona and his private actions. I didn't write it with anger or vindictiveness. I wrote it plainly, honestly, letting the facts speak for themselves. The truth was damning enough without embellishment. I didn't need to exaggerate or dramatize. I just needed to tell what happened, to lay it all out so people could see clearly who my father had really been. When I finished, the piece was long, over 5,000 words, detailed and thorough. I read through it multiple times, checking facts, verifying dates, making sure everything was accurate and supported by evidence. Then I called Rachel and read it to her over the phone. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "You're going to publish this?" "I'm going to submit it to the local paper and probably to some online outlets. I want people to know the truth." "It's going to destroy his reputation." "Yes. And it's going to expose Emma, expose me. Everyone will know we were the secret family." "I'll keep Emma anonymous as much as possible. I won't use her full name, won't include identifying details that could affect her at school. But yes, people will know about you, about the situation. I can't tell this story without that." "Why?" Rachel asked. "Why do you need to do this? He's dead. His lies died with him. Why can't we just move on quietly?" "Because he built his entire life on being seen as a good man," I said. "Everyone thinks he was this wonderful person, this pillar of integrity. They're naming scholarships after him. They're putting his picture on walls. They're holding him up as an example of what it means to be a good educator, a good community member. And it's all based on a lie. The truth needs to be told because secrets are what gave him power. The truth is what takes that power away. People are going to judge me, Rachel said quietly. They're going to say I should have known, that I was stupid to believe him, that it's my fault for being the other woman, even though I didn't know I was. Let them judge. Anyone who matters will understand that you were a victim too. And anyone who doesn't understand isn't worth worrying about. She was quiet again. Then, what does your mother think about this? She supports it. She's tired of protecting him too. Okay, Rachel said finally. Okay. If you think this is what needs to happen, then do it. But please, please keep Emma as anonymous as you can. She's 9 years old. She doesn't deserve to have this follow her forever. I will, I promise. I submitted the article to the local paper the next day. They called me within hours, their editor sounding shocked and uncertain. Are you sure about this? She asked. Do you understand what publishing something like this will mean? For your family? For you? I'm sure, I said. And I have documentation to back up everything I've written. Birth certificates, lease agreements, bank statements, photographs. It's all true. Can you send us copies of the documentation? I sent everything. Scanned copies of documents, photographs, email transcripts, everything except anything that would directly identify Emma. No photos of her face, no documents with her full name, nothing that would make her recognizable to people in her community. The editor called back the next day. We're going to publish it, but I want you to know this is going to blow up. This isn't just a local story anymore. Your father was well known in education circles. This is going to go beyond our town. I understand. Are you prepared for that? For the attention, the criticism, the way people are going to react? Yes, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I'm prepared. The article was published online that evening and in print the following morning. The headline was simple and direct. The Double Life of Thomas Whitmore, a daughter's discovery of her father's secret family. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the article had been shared hundreds of times on social media. People from our town, from neighboring towns, from across the state were reading it, commenting on it, discussing it. Former students of my father's came forward with their reactions, some defending him, saying his personal life didn't diminish his professional accomplishments, but most expressing shock and disappointment. Teachers who'd worked with him released statements saying they'd had no idea, that they were horrified to learn what he'd been hiding. The school district released an official statement saying they were reviewing the situation and would be making decisions about the proposed scholarship fund and other memorials. Within a week, they'd announced that the scholarship was canceled, that my father's photograph would not.